Ever.
Okay. Hey everyone, it is Tuesday. What is the June 18th? It is DMR Tech Net TV time, where we have the DMR Tech Net guys and a very interesting guest, and we try and show you and teach you and explain to you DMR stuff where we can't do it on the radios like we would normally do, like last night for our DMR Tech Net show. Anyway, tonight we only have one DMR Tech Net person stand with us because somebody else is on. Rick's on vacation. Brad is a club member and they have a board meeting tonight. Steve has VFW or American Legion stuff. Brian was having internet issues out at his house. And who am I forgetting? Oh, Tom. Tom's burning up 87 degrees at his house because it's a little warm here in Michigan. So that's why Stan's across the pond over in Wisconsin. So
anyway, you need to come down south and show you heat.
Oh, you got humidity too on that one, Jeff.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
See, I was talking. I miss Colorado. You know, high altitude, low humidity, 300 days of sunshine. We get 300 days of clouds here in Michigan. So, oh well, oh well. Anyway, welcome everyone. Tonight we have my good friend Jeff Hochberg W4JEW. His friend counterpart Matt Genelin N0YNT couldn't make it tonight. Took a vacation, came back, and they called him into work tonight. So, but Jeff's going to do his presentation of what he did in Dayton a month ago about DMR. How the packets get your voice from here to there.
If you don't want to use it,
that's fine.
Oh, hold on here. I'm gonna mute you over there, Ron. So we don't. There we go. And it's a pretty good presentation. Typically, what we do, Jeff, is that I'll go to the TechNet members, see what questions they have. You don't have to answer them right away, and then give your presentation. You can share screen if you want to, and then when you're done, well, you can answer the questions, and we'll open up to anyone else in our attendance tonight for their questions.
Okie dokie.
Should be a good show. I'm going to welcome Stan, WB8QJZ, one of our DMR Tech Net TV people, and the person that actually came up with DMR Tech Net TV. Stan, welcome to the show. What questions do you have about DMR tonight for Jeff?
Well, I thank you very much, Tina. I guess my question is, when you talk about DMR master servers and the proximity from you to one of them, what's actually the best, and how you determine if one of them doesn't appear to be talking to one of the other ones? Because occasionally you get cases where you hear some conversations and then you don't hear another couple of conversations. Nothing ever comes on the radio. So what's happening in the ether?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a loaded question.
Well, these all are going to be loaded questions.
Jeff. I know. That's all right. That's what makes this. That's what keeps this interesting, right? It's never a dull moment.
Yeah. Well, tell you what. Since I'm sure you've got a big presentation because we didn't get through it down in Dayton.
Yeah.
Keep that in mind. So when you're all done with the presentation, you can answer that or answer it during the presentation if you'd like.
Yeah, and I'm probably what I'll do here is I'm not gonna keep it like super formal or anything like that because we've got a nice small group here and we can custom tailor this. I mean, I'm happy to kind of take things in whatever direction y'all want to go in. I will do my best to answer that question. I'm going to share my screen here so you guys should be able to see my slide deck here momentarily. And I don't know why. I guess my iPad is not wanting to cooperate today, so no whiteboard, unfortunately. I don't know what's going on there, but in any event. So thanks, Dana, for inviting me. So yeah, Dana and I met last year at Dayton. Unfortunately, between Dayton last year and Dayton this year, I ended up getting in a really nasty car accident and just hit head on and broke both bones in my left forearm and waiting for go into surgery again because one bone healed, the other one hasn't. So I didn't get to go to Dayton this year, but I was there to present virtually. So this is what Matt, that other character in Zero YNT, this is what Matt looks like. So Matt and I, we're both Seabridge operators. So he took over operating, I guess is probably the world's largest, why not maybe the largest, I guess DMR Mark may still be. I don't know. I guess it's kind of, it depends on how you define the scope and breadth of the network. But K4USD used to be run by a gentleman by the name of John Birmingham, WX2XAB, who lived in Tennessee. And John was actually my mentor when I was learning DMR. Unfortunately, John became a silent key about 2 years ago, and he left K4USD in Matt's care. So Matt took over, and I didn't know who was taking over K4USD. So I just reached out to the guy, and we hit it off and became great friends. And so now we actually co-admin each other's C bridges. Again, my name is Jeff Hochberg W4JEW. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. I run my C bridge. I decided to, my friend Kevin and I, we co-own it, co-manage it. But the network is called Ham Digital. I think maybe we'll talk a little bit too about what makes a DMR network a DMR network. But yeah, I've been through the DMR grinder over the years, everything from when I was really little, I said when I grew up, I was going to get a Motorola radio. I wanted a real, honest to goodness Motorola radio, not like a FRS or GMRS. I wanted like a real radio. And so when I found out that if I got into DMR, I could get one, I was like, sign me up. So started downloading code plugs and getting really kind of down and dirty with them. And then well, I've got all sorts of opinions about how to go about code plugs, but that'll save that for another time. These first few slides are more Matt's contribution, showing kind of like the growth of DMR. I think when I started with DMR in like 2016, 2017, there were barely 100,000 registered IDs. It's pretty safe to say, I mean, DMR saw the most growth of any of the digital modes just in a relatively short time span. And, keeping in mind, too, that it used to be that DMR IDs, any ham could get, initially could get as many IDs as they wanted to, and then pared down because there's only so many that can be distributed, or so many valid IDs that now you can only get one. And so the fact that that number keeps growing and growing and growing means that the density of total hams is pretty significant. So yeah, just in a year, about another 20 some odd thousand new IDs. So pretty impressive for the growth. You guys have, I'm guessing this is probably like the most popular DMR radio. Even if you try DMR and you don't like it, this Anytone 878 UV2 Plus, it makes one heck of an analog radio as well. It's pretty amazing. Yeah, it's an excellent radio.
Okay.
Brandmeister dashboard. I don't know if I'm getting acknowledged or if there's somebody else in the background there that's talking and not on mute.
I'm gonna get here.
So yeah, I mean, if you've been to Brandmeister, you're probably familiar with what that looks like, but I think the point to show here really is the number of hotspots versus the number of repeaters. I think, pretty safe to say hotspots also been a big part of why DMR grew as quickly as it did, because for even for someone like myself living in metropolitan Atlanta, there weren't that many DMR repeaters around, but I could get a little hotspot, and get on the air no matter where I was. And so I think that's, and the fact too that I'm basically in complete control of it at any given point in time, just really makes it really advantageous, easy to get on from wherever you are, and I don't know. I still believe in using repeaters more. The people who are paying to put them up and maintain them, they're providing quite a service to the community, and I think it's to our benefit and to maximize their investment and make sure that we continue to use them. So you may have hotspot. Please make use of repeaters if they're around in your area so that they stay up. Otherwise, we're going to see that number drop more and more and more. Just some other DMR networks that are out there. I think a lot of hams just think Brandmeister is it, and the answer is Brandmeister is not it. There are a lot of other DMR networks that are around. There are a lot of DMR networks that are around that do not support hotspots, but the ones that I am going to go over here do. So TGIF is also an excellent DMR network, not anywhere near as big in terms of like number of talk groups or number of users. But I'm a big fan of quality versus quantity. You could go through the Brandmeister statistics at any point in time and see that there are hundreds of talk groups that may have like 1 or 2 QSOs on them per week. As far as I'm concerned, those talk groups shouldn't even exist. It just creates fragmentation. When I say fragmentation, it's my feeling is we should be pulling people together, not driving them apart. And we drive people apart by creating more and more talk groups. I much rather have, a solid network that has only a handful of talk groups than have, a whole bunch of people out on their own little islands. There are a lot of independent networks, and this is actually an area that Matt and I disagree on. One of the things that I guess is cool about DMR is if you want to start your own network, you can. One of the things that really sucks about DMR is if you want to start your own network, you can. And I say it like that because truth of the matter is that the more and more DMR networks that come up, the more confusion that creates for people because they don't know what server to connect to. They don't understand who it is that they can talk to. I'm in Atlanta. There's a repeater downtown. One of my friends lives near the repeater. He doesn't have a hotspot. I have a hotspot. If I'm connected to Georgia 3113, that repeater has Georgia 3113 on it. Why can't we talk to each other? Well, that's part of the confusion of DMR, and unless you're spending time kind of peeling back the layers of the onion to understand what network your hotspot's connected to, what network the repeater is connected to, this is more along the lines of what I refer to as this fragmentation or these splintering of different DMR networks. And frankly, I actually ended up contributing to the problem by starting my own DMR network. But a lot of it was just done merely out of curiosity and just the learning experience of it. But when I was very strategic in terms of how I provided connectivity to users in my area, because my focus was to make sure that I pulled people together. Unfortunately, there are some network operators that are out there that are just kind of like building more kind of like blockades around them and isolating things more, which I think is really counter to what hams really stand for. So this is like my portion of the presentation. This is where it gets really kind of down into the guts of the packet. So I'm a network security engineer by trade. I work for a company called Cloudflare. So my day is day in and day out is like protecting customers from DDoS attacks and helping protect or secure customers' web applications and whatnot. So I have the privilege of working on one of the largest networks in the world, and I get to see a lot. Believe it or not, there's a lot of ham radio sites that use Cloudflare. PSK Reporter is probably one of the biggest ones. I'm sure there's some others I'm not thinking of right off the top of my head. There's parts of the APRS IS network that are behind Cloudflare. So we do a lot for the ham community as well. And actually our CTO is a ham, interestingly enough. This is Matt's slide. I'm going to skip over this one. I don't like that one. Goodbye. Let's go over here. Yeah. Did I hit the wrong key? I guess I did. All right. So I guess and hopefully, I mean, these terms are pretty straightforward to everyone, but there's standards and then there's proprietary extensions or proprietary protocols. There's proprietary extensions to standards. When we have standards, right, the idea is we're encouraging multiple vendors, multiple different systems to work together, and even like in the like just networking in general, right? We've got DNS and HTTP and DHCP and all these different network protocols, and they're all based on a standard. And the idea is that if you follow the standard, you conform to that standard, that you're going to have some interoperability with each other. Well, the same applies in radio world too. So DMR, Digital Mobile Radio, is a standard that was developed by European Telecommunication Systems Institute, ETSI. They own and maintain the intellectual property for DMR. They do define the standard at a global level. What you find is that, and within DMR, there's multiple different types of DMR. There's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. Tier 2, just like kind of point of reference, is what we use in the ham world. Tier 3 is really more used. It's if you're familiar with trunk radio systems, tier 3 is adding trunking to a DMR system. But the general idea is that if I have a standard and I adhere to that standard, then I can use a Motorola repeater with a Hytera radio or an Anytone radio. But if I start bolting on more and more proprietary features, because you can still have the standard, but you can add your own bells and whistles to it, and make it a Motorola DMR product versus a Hytera product versus a Kenwood product by adding vendor proprietary features to it. But guess what? Those are only going to work if you have a Motorola repeater and a Motorola radio, or a Hytera repeater and a Hytera radio. So if you get those two pieces, both sides of the equation, you get the kitchen sink. But if you get a Hytera radio and a Motorola repeater, or an Anytone radio and Hytera repeater, you're going to get the basics. We are starting to see some interesting features that really began as proprietary features that have kind of crossed over into the ham radio world. And I think my favorite one of all is called Talker Alias. So if you've been working DMR for a while, you're probably comfortable with the idea of downloading the radio ID database and uploading it into your radio. And then every once in a while, you got to remember to go out and download the new database. And it takes several minutes, and it's kind of a pain in the butt. Talker Alias is actually a way, when you key up, that you transmit your ID information over the air. Because without the database, without anything like that, when you key up a DMR radio, all you're sending over the air is your DMR ID number. That does not satisfy the FCC's requirements for ham. But I don't even know that Talker Alias technically does either, like what D-Star does and what C4FM do, or C4FM provide. But it's a step closer. It's a way, though, that we've extended the standard. We've taken vendor proprietary features, started supporting them in the DMR world. Brandmeister supports Talker Alias now. It's a great feature. Get away from that database. So DMR repeaters. I was president of the Atlanta Radio Club in 2018, I think. Yeah, sometime around there. And when I petitioned really, really hard to get the Atlanta Radio Club to have a DMR repeater downtown Atlanta, really nice high site. And I couldn't wait to play on this repeater. I was like, oh, this thing's going to have all these great features. Oh my God, what a disappointment. The repeater did like practically nothing. All the intelligence of DMR is not on the repeater. It's on the network. Setting up a repeater is transmit, receive frequency, color code, IP address, and what's the IP address or DNS name of the DMR network that you're pointing to. And the rest of it is controlled on the network. I mean, it's really simple. You look at a code plug for a DMR repeater and you compare it to a code plug for a radio. If you get into programming code plugs and you get really savvy with them, a repeater code plug will take like 3 minutes. A radio code plug you could spend hours on. It's just pretty amazing how simple the repeaters are, in that they really require very, very little information. And the point of this is really is all the intelligence is on the server or on the network side of it. You'll hear me use the term sea bridge. It's the letter C hyphen bridge, not SEA like ocean bridge. It's developed by a tiny little company. I don't expect anybody has ever heard of it, called RavenNet. I had never heard about it before I got into DMR either, so don't feel bad. They were, I think they still are too, to an extent, sold on the Motorola price list. So Motorola protocol for communicating between DMR repeaters is called IP Site Connect. And the C Bridge supports Motorola IP Site Connect. So you can hook up 2 or more Motorola repeaters, and they can talk to each other over IP over a great distance. But you can also connect a C Bridge to another C Bridge. And there is a proprietary protocol that RavenNet developed for doing this. And interestingly enough, Brandmeister reverse engineered it, which, you know, I mean, reverse engineering sometimes is a good thing. In this case, it is. Whereby now a C Bridge owner can link their server up with Brandmeister, and we can exchange talk groups. So my C Bridge is the originating point for Georgia statewide 3113, and for Atlanta Metro 31131. So Brandmeister gets those for me, but I get a whole bunch of talk groups from Brandmeister as well. So you can connect Motorola repeaters, you can connect other C Bridges, you can connect to Brandmeister with a C Bridge. Can you connect a hotspot to a C Bridge? Not really. There is a way. It requires a lot of work, a lot of caffeine, a lot of Python code, and I would say it's probably not really worth it unless you're just interested in making it happen. It also costs a lot of money in terms of the licensing on the C Bridge, because the C Bridge is a commercial product. It's not open source. So I don't know about you guys, but here in the Southeast, we have nets, and we'll hear, you know, sometimes the net op isn't intelligible, or you know, people are keying up and they're stepping on each other, or you know, there's just timing issues. There's all sorts of connectivity issues, and I swear, for whatever reason, on the nights when it rains, and I know it has nothing to do with it, but on the nights when it rains, the net always has more problems. It's just something I've noticed. But we do hear, you know, is DMR ready for prime time? So let's just talk about connectivity at the network level, right? In the TCP/IP worlds, there's really the 2 dominant entities are TCP and UDP, right? So TCP is transmission communication or control protocol, and UDP is user datagram protocol. And the difference between the 2 is that TCP is what we would call a connection-oriented protocol. Is I send a packet, but I wait to hear on the remote end that the remote side received the packet, and that packet is looking good, and then sends an acknowledgement back to the sender. And then the sender sends a new packet, and receiver sends back an acknowledgement, and goes back and forth and back and forth. The good thing about the TCP is that there's like a guarantee that message gets there. But guess what? There's overhead associated with doing that. So each time that we wait for that acknowledgement, now granted, sometimes these things don't happen serially. There's a lot of parallel processing and whatnot. But TCP is not very good for real-time communications. That's where UDP comes in. Now, UDP sounds like a bad idea in theory. It actually works quite well in that UDP basically just shoves packets out on the wire and hopes that they make it to the other side. And frankly, in most cases, they do. And applications can, voice applications can survive some packet loss before things become a problem. But there is no acknowledgement. There's no concept of a retransmission. And can you imagine what it would be like if somebody's voice dropped out and then we decided to just kind of retransmit the portion that dropped out? It would sound insane. But UDP does not have the same overhead. So we find it used a lot in voice and video, because of the fact that that lack of overhead means much better performance. But again, it's like, just shove the packet out on the wire and hope that it gets there. Well, here's the problem is that, there's this thing called QoS, or quality of service. And QoS is basically a way of, somebody, can you mute out, please? Thank you very much. So what QoS is a way that a network administrator can say, these packets are more important in terms of overall performance than others. So voice and video traffic, I'm going to give those like topmost priority. Maybe I'm watching or I'm browsing the web, or I go download a really large file, but then I get a phone call, or somebody, calls me on my radio. I want to make sure that there's enough bandwidth that's available for that call. So the devices that honor QoS, they'll actually throttle back that communication a little bit to make sure that that amount of bandwidth, we guarantee it's available for the voice or video traffic. But here's the problem is, once a packet leaves a network, like your home network, like I could have 2 devices on my home network where QoS is honored between them. But once my packet leaves my office, or, wherever you happen to be, your internet service provider is under no obligation whatsoever to honor QoS. QoS is not honored over the internet. In fact, UDP isn't even really considered high priority across the internet. But we still continue to use UDP because it's fast. It's great for real-time scenarios. But the ISP ultimately owns all the points in between where we want to get, where we are and where we want to go to. They call the shots. They really don't care about our QSOs. They care about making money, and they're not making money on us on our residential connections. They're worrying more about businesses. We end up kind of bearing the brunt of it, though, in that we get dropouts, we get spotty connectivity. And what can you do about it? Unfortunately, not really a whole lot. This is just kind of like the reality of it is why do we see the things that we do, or the behaviors that we do? This is why. Granted, we're all getting a lot more bandwidth at our disposal, but more bandwidth isn't necessarily the solution to the problem. So how is it, though, that organizations do roll out DMR or P25 or NXDN and do it across, really large geographic boundaries and do it successfully? Well, they're not using the internet. They're using private connections that are provided by a telecommunications provider like AT&T or Verizon, that are typically based on like MPLS or Metro Ethernet, where all the points that are communicating with each other are all going through the same carrier's network. The company is paying a lot of money to the carrier for the service. Quality of service is guaranteed. Packet loss, they say, no more than 0.01% packet losses. We guarantee that that's always going to be the case. Voice traffic can be and typically is prioritized. And that's how companies roll out really, really reliable radio networks over large areas. And unfortunately, we don't have this luxury. I mean, it's a shame, but unfortunately, that's just kind of the reality that we live with. However, if you do happen to have a really large, network that you control end to end, and you can guarantee the bandwidth, you can have a great DMR network. Let's see here. Wet the whistle. Anybody have any questions?
Hey, Jeff, I think what you just said is great, and it was a great explanation. Just one comment about UDP.
Mm-hmm.
Your video is right now crystal clear, and that's a UDP connection. So how much loss and things we get across the network is really debatable. So, I understand what you're saying and I get it, but I've been seeing internet connections these days run much more stable and very low loss. So
sure. Keep in mind too, though, you're also looking at a fixed image, right? There's no video here, right?
No, I'm looking at your video of you rocking back and forth in your chair.
Yeah, yeah.
So-
And I mean, there's also compression, right? I mean, there's a lot of stuff
Sure.
that's being done to optimize that. Sure, you're absolutely right.
Yep. It's a 2
Yeah, I
meg
mean, things
stream,
are,
so that's still
yeah,
pretty
yeah,
decent.
things are improving. They continue to improve. Um, but the underlying protocols that we're using for DMR, they're not changing,
Nope. No, I get
right?
that, and I understand that, but you know, what's the average DMR connection rate?
Oh, it's
For
very
a voice
minuscule
channel?
bandwidth. Yeah, it's very,
Yeah.
very minuscule bandwidth. Yeah,
20K?
yeah. Yeah, and I think where we find problems, right, is I'm just trying to think of like a good way of showing an example, but a lot of hotspots connect to people's home networks over Wi-Fi. We tend to think that the issue is maybe on the internet or is RF, radio RF. What about people's Wi-Fi connectivity in their home, right?
Yep.
It's not always set up right. There could be interference from neighbors from, I have a power plant 1,000 feet behind my house. It's great for my HF work. It's always makes
Yeah.
things interesting.
Imagine
But
your
yeah,
RF
I mean, you're right.
noise is horrible.
Things are getting better. But at the same time, I think we're going to continue to see some of these problems, and it's more just to make you aware of it, not to be kind of like doom and gloom sort of thing.
Yep. Okay.
But yeah, so at the same time, right, there's DMR as a protocol itself, but as far as like all the different DMR networks, there's a lot of proprietariness in terms of Brandmeister has their own protocol that they use between their master servers. Seabridges, the CC protocol. Hytera has their own version of IP Site Connect. DMR Plus is another network that's out there. They built their own protocol. But some of these networks do want to be able to communicate between each other, and where there's interest in doing that, the administrators put the effort into ensuring that there's some sort of commonality. Brandmeister, I would say, does the best job out of all of them in that, they support Motorola repeaters, Hytera repeaters, even some like really interesting like Hytera Android mobile devices that have the ability to do push to talk over cellular. They'll support those natively terminating. So IP connectivity, push to talk over cellular, but terminates natively on Brandmeister. So these guys have just a ton of different services that they offer. Their network went through tons of growing pains years ago, but they've really built something that's just absolutely phenomenal. I mean, just absolutely phenomenal. I don't necessarily care for the people that run it so much in the way that they treat other hams. But the technology that they've built is just amazing. I mean, what they've built is truly incredible. And I mean, for what they've done, I mean, I would say that they have the most comprehensive offering out there. That said, FreeDMR is an excellent network. The guys there, I love working with them. They're doing some really, really interesting stuff in terms of usability, like the dial-a-talk group, where you don't have to have anything more than just a single channel, single talk group programmed into your radio, and you can key in whichever talk group ID number you want to use, and you can talk on it. You're not having to make these massive code plugs. Granted, I think Brandmeister does it to an extent too, but FreeDMR, they basically took some other open source products that are out there, or code that was out there, and they really extended the capabilities of it. TGIF, they had a guy who custom developed their server, rewrote everything from the ground up. TGIF was a splintering of guys from Brandmeister that started their own network. So they were using a lot of like glue and popsicle sticks from Brandmeister code, but they are their own independent network running 100% on their own code now. But I really love the guys from FreeDMR. They're super. I hope we see more and more of them here in the US. There are quite a few FreeDMR servers in the US, but I think the most of the users are still actually in Europe. But I turn people over to FreeDMR who want just different experience and to test out some new and interesting functionality that we're not seeing anywhere else. So we when we're talking about these different DMR networks and how we get traffic from one place to the other, there's two terms that in like the networking world that I work in every day versus like the DMR world, we tend to use the terms bridging and routing. synonymously in the DMR world. A C bridge, right, is by virtue bridging traffic from a repeater to the C bridge and potentially to another repeater. But they also have the ability to route traffic to other networks. So I have, and I'll actually bring this up to show you guys what it looks like. We have the ability to do this. I'm going to bring up the admin interface here on my C bridge. I will make it bigger so it's easier to see. Just bear with me for a second here. All right, so this is what the admin interface looks like on a C bridge. I think anybody who's seen a C bridge before probably is used to seeing a view that looks like this, where they can just see the real-time activity up here at the top, and then historical information. Administrators, when they log in, can get an idea of the repeaters that are actively connected. If somebody keys up on a repeater, actually see activity. The top part of the box is time slot 1, the bottom part of the box is time slot 2. So actually see these light up either green or red, depending on whether the call is coming in from that repeater or going out through the repeater. I can get an idea of all the different DMR networks that my C bridge is connected to. So I see, a number of different talk groups that I get from Brandmeister from the 3104 master. I also get a bunch of different talk groups from the 3103 master. And there was a question earlier that came up about which master do I use. I'll talk about that in just a second here. But the C bridge is capable of talking to a wide variety of these other networks, all because they support that CC protocol that the C bridge company RavenNet developed. How do we know which master server to connect to? Well, lower latency is better. But sometimes it's also going to be based on where the Brandmeister administrator says they're willing to set you up. When we first got set up, my server sits in Atlanta. 3103 is in San Jose, California. So it's all the way across the country. Every time somebody keys up on a repeater in Atlanta, and it's for one of those talk groups on 3103, that traffic needs to give from Atlanta to California, back to Atlanta. That's all within, normal boundaries, though, or within the tolerances of DMR. It's not a problem. Is it better to have it closer? Sure. I mean, is it going to be that big of a difference that it's going to be super noticeable? Probably not. We did have an issue a couple of years ago where, so I ended up breaking off all the Georgia talk groups. So anything on 3104, these are all like Atlanta Metro, Georgia Statewide, Aries, some other smaller groups here within Georgia, where we had thought latency was an issue. And so Brandmeister was kind enough to move those Georgia talk groups over onto 3104, which at the time was a brand new master. It was in Chicago. So, I don't know, give or take half the distance to San Jose. Until we figure out how to enter the fourth dimension, we still have to deal with the geography, right? The latency is going to be part and parcel to how far that traffic needs to travel. So the closer we can get things, the better. It's not always going to be the case. I mean, I can have a connection to somebody in Alabama or Tennessee, and it be just a really crappy internet service provider between the two of us. Just because it's closer doesn't necessarily mean it's better. I can drill into these and get some statistics to understand, what the quality is, how many packets sent and received. Is there any loss? In this case here, 0.0%, pretty good. 18 calls handled in the past hour, 0 missed. But how do we set up repeaters? So in the IPSC or IP Site Connect, Motorola IP Site Connect protocol, there's a term master and a peer. And in an IP Site Connect network, you have one master, you can have 14 peers. But each one of these, I basically just break them up. This is a master, and then the peer is the repeater. So the C bridge is, this is a master, this is a master, this is a master, this is a master. So all of these are masters, and then each repeater effectively connects as a peer. This is, this repeater is time slot 1, time slot 2, time slot 1, time slot 2, and just kind of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth here. Green obviously is good, actively connected. If I drill in here, actually won't look in there, some sensitive information in there. But some just kind of general provisioning information, whether or not I want this thing to start up when it boots, when the server boots. This is where the good stuff is in here. So these are all the different talk groups that I carry. And these are, so Georgia, as I mentioned, for by virtue of being in Georgia, it makes sense for my C bridge to be the owning bridge for Georgia statewide and for Atlanta Metro. I exchange Georgia with several other DMR networks. So I send it back and forth to Brandmeister, Chicagoland, DMR Mark also gets it from me. So there's a wide variety of other DMR networks that are connected to me. If you key up on Brandmeister 3104 on Georgia Talk Group, this traffic is going to come into my C bridge. Any of these other ones that have Georgia CC in the list, that traffic is going to go out to all these other servers. So it comes in on one, goes out to all the others. So we're literally bridging that connection. But we're also doing some routing too. So if I scroll down here a little bit, these connections, or these identifiers here, IP site connect. So this is actually a repeater connection, and this is 3101. So I know that's Alabama statewide. What happens is that if a call comes in on the repeater, that's so this is time slot 2 on the first master, 3101 for Alabama. I got basically go back up here. Alabama comes in from Brandmeister 3103. Alabama doesn't exist on my C bridge. I am routing that traffic. So when somebody keys up on 3101, that traffic is coming in through the repeater into the C bridge and getting routed to a different network. I have local talk groups. They only exist on my server. That traffic is not getting routed anywhere else. And I know this because I programmed it, so I know that this traffic doesn't get routed anywhere else. But it's all based on the repeater that the traffic comes in on, what talk group ID somebody keys up on, and where I'm going to send that traffic to next. Right, so if somebody keys up here on, what is this, 9071 or 9072, these JOTA TAC, Jamboree on the air TAC frequencies, or talk groups rather, these come in, these are all the different repeaters that I provided to, and they also come in from DMR Mark, if I recall correctly. Yep, Jamboree, TAC 1 and TAC 2. So, depending on what network they're coming in. So some of that traffic stays local to the C bridge, and it's only for people to use on the repeater that it's defined on. And it's just stays inside the C bridge. Some of it gets bridged to other repeaters that are connected to the C bridge, and it never leaves my network. But sometimes that traffic gets routed to other networks. So when we talk about the concept of routing versus bridging, that's why we kind of tend to use them synonymously, but they do, at the end of the day, they do have different meanings. So I guess I'm wanting to make sure that this makes sense to you guys, that seeing this sort of stuff is helpful to you, or if it's doing a bang up job of confusing you. C-Bridge is really, it was really hard for me to understand at first, so I can kind of go through it pretty easily, but if you see something in here that's like, that's interesting, I'd like to know more about it, this is a cool opportunity to do it. This is not an everyday thing.
I tried to provide Jeff with a lot of information in the newsletter today about C-Bridge's master servers.
Yeah, you kind of took all the thunder. No, I'm kidding. It's fine.
Well, hopefully they'll read it and understand, or, hey, I have a question. Why is this, that? And I'm glad, routing and bridging, that interesting. See, I was synonymous with those terms, but now, no, they're different.
They are, yeah, they are different. And this server is basically doing a combination of the two. It's just like it's like I don't know, like call sign routing in D-Star, right? Somebody keys up on a repeater in Atlanta. They want to talk to somebody in Ohio. D-Star network keeps track of where the station was last communicated, so that if I key up and I request, my friend in Ohio's call sign, the D-Star network keeps track of where my friend last keyed up, which repeater his traffic last came in on, and we'll route that traffic through the network. The Seabridge or Brandmeister in particular, they do support private call. Supposedly, my Seabridge will also support private call. We went through an exercise a few months ago where we went to try and set it up with one of the guys from Brandmeister who helped me out. And I was never able to find enough people to actually test it. It's entirely possible people are using it. I just don't know. I don't sit and watch this every day. The server is pretty darn reliable. The only time I really ever have to reboot it is if I'm putting a security update on it. Otherwise, it'll stay up and just keep doing its job. It's extremely reliable. I think some of the cooler stuff to look at is, it seems to be kind of like a quiet period right now. There's not a ton of traffic coming through here right this moment. But we can see some activity, 91, 93 tend to be pretty popular. 1 and 3 on, or 91, 93 on Brandmeister. I'm not sure what 1 and 3 are on my Brandmeister connection here. 1, that's their USA bridge, and 3 is, oh, Maine is popular tonight then. So yeah, I mean, I was very, I kind of like to just give the repeater owners whatever it is that they ask for. So if a repeater owner comes to me and says that they want to connect to the Seabridge, I basically set them up with a connection, give them a password, tell them the IP address to connect to, and then I carve up. Basically, I try and give the same set of talk groups and the same talk group IDs to everybody, so that no matter which repeater you go to on the Ham Digital network, they're all configured the same way, so that people aren't having to do like lots of one-off configurations on in their code plugs. But for all intents and purposes, they all stay the same. But repeater operators can make special requests. I brought on a couple of repeaters in Rhode Island recently that happened to be they wanted the Rhode Island talk groups, which I didn't carry before. So I just contacted Brandmeister and said, can you guys set these up? And it took a few days, but they went ahead and provisioned them. So it's easy. It's usually not too big of a deal to go back and get them. They're pretty easy to work with. The one thing that's like really, really frowned upon in the DMR world is this concept of redistributing a talk group. So just as an example, so again, like I'm like the originating point for Georgia. I exchanged that primarily with Brandmeister, but there's these other DMR networks that get Georgia from me as well. And this is all okay because these guys are all directly connected to me. Here's where things get bad though. What happens if I give, or Brandmeister and we talk Georgia all day long, talk Georgia all day long to Chicagoland, but Chicagoland decides to give Georgia to someone else that's not on this list. They've just redistributed a talk group and basically created an extra hop. Now, technically speaking, there's not really anything wrong with doing that. But when there's some sort of a problem, it does make things really, really difficult to troubleshoot. So it's frowned upon. The general idea is if somebody wants to carry Georgia, they should come directly to me. And I would set them up, and then they would basically just be like, just get added here to this list. So we kind of try and keep things as flat as possible, because the flatter they are, the easier it is to troubleshoot. So there have been times, in fact, last weekend in particular, I won't necessarily go into any sort of details, but there was a network out in the Midwest that was caught redistributing Georgia to another DMR network, and they didn't have my permission. Brandmeister didn't like seeing it. Brandmeister actually has an automated system for discovering it. And when their automated system discovers it, the first thing they do is they just chop off the connection wherever it is closest to them. So what did that mean? They disconnected me. So anybody on Georgia statewide within my C bridge or any of the other C bridges connected to me, that all continued to work. But if somebody was on Brandmeister and wanted to talk to somebody on a repeater anywhere else that wasn't on Brandmeister's network, it wasn't happening. And it was all because of the actions of somebody else in a completely different part of the country that, I trusted to do the right thing, and they went ahead and they didn't. And it actually resulted in me getting disconnected. That sort of thing happens a lot. And it can create a lot of frustration, not just for me, but for the people who are on the repeaters that are connected to me. So I have like a vested interest in making sure that that continues. So sometimes difficult decisions need to be made, and I discontinued providing Georgia to that network, and they won't get it again. I mean, granted, they're like, somewhere in the Midwest. I'm not sure why Georgia is important to them, but there's tons of other talk groups out there. They'll find a way if they need to communicate with somebody. But, this is just a common like handshake agreement between network operators is you don't redistribute talk groups. It's like, I don't know, the first rule of Fight Club is we don't talk about Fight Club. Well, this is like that equivalent in the DMR network world. And the only reason for it is because of how difficult it makes things to troubleshoot. It really makes things like orders of magnitude more difficult.
Interesting, Jeff. Thanks so much for what you've shown. That is really, really interesting. Some fascinating stuff. I got a question, but it's really not directed at you. It's actually at one of the networks about talk group blocking, such as Ron lives in New York. He tried to talk to his brother who lives in Michigan with Michigan statewide, but Ron was talk group blocked because he didn't live in Michigan.
I've never heard of that happening.
Dana, I was talk group blocked because I went over the 10 minutes.
But they are also talk group blocked. Well, it happened to me. I was talk group blocked.
Right,
too
I have
year,
not had that.
So, and yeah, there's one network that has 10-minute limits. That's a lot of contention. Jeff, you've heard us complain about it before, but
yeah,
we don't run the network. So
yeah, I think a lot of that happens because people don't understand why that rule exists.
So was the Michigan net involved the MI5 folks? Because the MI5 folks are pretty insular, and they don't want anybody on their network unless you subscribe to their mailing list, so they can tell you when to get off of it. And they claim that they're going to connect all the sites up using microwave so that they're completely independent of the internet. And there is one Brandmeister gateway that gets into their network, statewide 1, statewide 2. And it may very well be that they may have a rule that says that if you don't live in Michigan, that you're not supposed to use MI5.
could be, Dave. I was going to say that that's actually going to be one of our topics here down the road on the TechNet. I know, too bad Tom isn't here, N8TJ, who really likes using the MI5 set of repeaters around the state. I hardly hear anything when I listen to them. I mean, we
Yeah,
have
but
severe
they
weather, and I
do.
put on the weather channels, nothing.
Yeah, they do use it as a backbone between the National Weather Service locations across the state when there's widespread severe weather going on. And that's one of the reasons why they'll essentially kick everybody off of it. They'll say, don't use whatever the talk slot is, whatever the slot is. They'll say, don't use it because we're using it now for this, and then they'll send another note out later saying it's now been returned to normal use.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Jeff, I have a question. A year ago, you joined us on the TechNet, and you said you had to get the talk group 3126. And I think you had to add that to your local repeater. Is that correct?
No, I think I was just using my hotspot that day to join you guys. Yeah.
I'm just curious because you said you had to do a little magic to get it added or something like that, so you could join us on it.
I don't remember. Yeah, I don't remember. I was pretty sure I was using a hotspot, but I don't remember. Just to cover that 10-minute limit thing, I kind of objected to it at first. Because it's like, what's the big deal sort of thing. But think about it this way. DMR repeaters have 2 time slots on them, right? We can have talk groups that are either PTT or always on. And what you'll find is that in Georgia or in Michigan, the statewide talk group is almost always an always on talk group, meaning that anytime someone keys up on that talk group, irrespective of where they are in the world, if they're on a hotspot, connected to Brandmeister, and that Brandmeister is bridged into the network, like a network in the state with all the repeaters on it, that basically all the repeaters in the state, that time slot that Michigan is on, they all light up. And so basically that time slot becomes unavailable for anybody else that wants to use that repeater. Granted, there's another time slot on the repeater, but it may be that the talk groups that people want to use are not on that time slot. They may be on the one that is lit up all the time. And if somebody's not, like within the proximity of that particular repeater, they may be okay with, like waiting a little bit. But if you are constantly keeping that keyed up, you're effectively tying up the time slot, and it could be there's somebody else that's within the vicinity of a repeater that's waiting patiently to use it, and they can't. I mean, I actually ran into a case. We had an emergency here in Georgia, and there were guys that were on Georgia statewide on the time slot. All the Georgia repeaters were being keyed up, and it was 2 guys. One was in the UK, the other was here somewhere in Georgia, and I needed to get a call out, and unfortunately it was on a talk group that was only on time slot 2. Because of how important it was, I've since added it to time slot 1 so that it's there. It's not documented, but it's there for an emergency if I need it. But that's what ends up happening is that you get these. The general rule of thumb is, right, you're supposed to establish communication on like these kind of like more wide-reaching talk groups, and then QSY over to a talk group that's likely PTT on a repeater that's elsewhere, so that it doesn't open up or tie up the time slot on all the repeaters in the state. So that was where the 10-minute limit came from. And the only time that there's typically ever an exception made for it is if there's a net, and it, of course, it's more than like in Georgia, it's 8 p.m. Eastern time at Wednesday nights. So for a 1 hour period, they overlooked the 10-minute limit. But outside of that, I have seen people get penalized. I've been penalized for it. Because at first I didn't agree with it, but then it took me a little while to think about what it was that was happening. Like, what, that's actually a really good point.
So can you talk a little bit about the tactical groups like TAC 310 and what happened there? Because at one time that was probably the most popular talk group on Brandmeister.
I know.
And then there was some rule they put up that said that you could not set it up as a static group on your hotspots, and I couldn't understand what the problem was with that.
I honestly don't remember all the details behind it. So he said that Brandmeister, from a technology standpoint, they've built something really, really special. The problem that I have with them even today is that they don't publish their rules anywhere, and they change them like the wind.
Ah, one of those kind of deals. Okay.
Yeah, so they basically changed them. One day I had someone from Brandmeister contact me. I was carrying Colorado digital, or was it Colorado HD? It was a really, really popular talk group for a while, 31088. And I was carrying it. And then it just so happened that my friend Kevin, that I admin, or co-own the Seabridge with, he runs one of the IPSC2 servers, IPSC2 New England. And we were passing Colorado HD over between my Seabridge and his IPSC2 server. And Colorado HD evidently got upset, contacted Brandmeister, said, we don't want the IPSC2 server having our talk group, make it stop. And Brandmeister just said, cut it off just one day. No rule, no nothing. It was just, kind of wrinkled somebody's feathers, ruffled somebody's feathers in Colorado. And they just decided that was that. And I never had the talk group since then. Stuff like that happens. 310, I kind of said it was like CB channel 19 for a while. It was like, can somebody give me a signal report sort of thing? It's like Parrot's there. If you want a signal report, go use Parrot. Don't.
Yeah.
TAC 310 was full-time or always on talk group on a lot of hotspots and repeaters, and people would key up, how's my audio? And every time they did that, just lighting up hotspots and repeaters all around the world. And I think it just kind of got to people over time.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't think that a repeater should have a 310 as a static talk group. I mean, maybe hotspots, but
yeah, it should not. And I think I thought that was what happened. Was I thought that they made it so that repeaters couldn't, but I guess it affected hotspots too.
That's what I was.
Channel.
What's that?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
TAC channels cannot be static.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I thought was kind of strange. So, but now in the case of, you're saying don't tie up an entire state's network with chatter, are the TAC 310, 311, 312, is that the place to go to take a conversation like that then? Because then it's just occurring on hotspots and not tying up repeaters? I mean,
TAC 310, 311, 312, all the way up through 317. I mean, that's on all of the repeaters that are connected to me in Georgia, but it's PTT on all of them.
Yeah, right. I see somebody's using TAC 311 right now. I can see it on here from a hotspot, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
But by the way, Dave, do you know that every state, Brandmeister has a TAC channel in every state? They added it last year once they started implementing their 10-minute limit. Michigan, we're 31264 is the TAC channel.
Ah, okay.
Or you can use 31266, the Michigan Nets channel. No time limit on that one.
Let me see here if this radio's got power. It does.
Right, and of course our repeater, the actual repeater here has a local ID, and so if you use that, why then in theory you can essentially keep the conversation local to the repeater and not tie up the rest of the state.
And that's why they say if you move to a 5-digit talk group or 6-digit, get off the 4-digit, so you don't tie it up.
Can I say something?
Yeah, of course.
I think a good point of reference is with the repeaters, if you notice that you're using a particular talk group on a local repeater a lot, and you're having long-winded conversations, it might be a good idea to look into a hotspot specifically for those long-winded conversations and programming that in separately in your radio. And that way you're freeing up the repeater so other people can use it that don't have access to a hotspot. That's just my 2 cents on it, because you're kind of eliminating a source of contention for people saying, hey, this guy's always hogging the repeater.
Yeah, I think that the problem we run into and I mean, just out of personal experience, right, is okay, so I take that kind of general rule. I go on Georgia statewide, I find somebody who I want to talk with, and now we say, all right, let's, QSY over to, I don't know, Atlanta Metro, for example. Well, what happens if we don't, either one of us don't have Atlanta Metro programmed into a radio? Somebody else he has Georgia Central in his radio, and I've got North Georgia in mine. Well, we're kind of screwed. We can't talk.
Well, I think that also comes to the point of knowing how to do the talk groups on the fly in your radio and having the group call set up in the radio in the case of the Anytones to set it up where it holds that talk group for like 30 minutes instead of 5 seconds. So it'll stay on that group call. So you can just press the 0 and hold it and then type in the group number, the talk group number.
Yeah, that feature is really nice. There are definitely some features that anytime somebody asks me like what radio to get if they're going to get into DMR, it's like 9 times out of 10 it's Anytone. I'm a little spoiled. I kind of like went the Motorola route across the board. The downside to that is I can't program from the front panel like on the fly like that. If I don't have it programmed in my radio when I need it.
I completely understand that. I've got a 7550E that I actually have the Bluetooth programming on. So if I have to, I can pop out my laptop and put the talk groups in that I need to. But other than that, I've got a cable that stays pretty much bundled with it.
Yeah.
And it goes back to your point of the Anytones kind of spoiled us with being able to do that front panel programming on the fly, as long as we remember to go into the code plug settings and optional settings and go to the correct tab and set up that group call and the private call to hold for 30 minutes instead of 5 seconds, which is usually the default in the factory code plug.
Yeah, so that's another thing too. That's I think that may not be like maybe at the forefront of hams minds, right? Is that these radios were not designed for hams initially. They were designed for people who are not supposed to be playing around on the front panel with programming. So they're administratively restricted. There's a lot of that functionality that we expect and we know how to be good shepherds of, right? That like a security guard or somebody who's like working in a hotel or whatever, they don't need that. They shouldn't have that, right? They're going to potentially jeopardize the configuration that's on the radio and not be able to communicate with people. But yeah, I mean, the Anytone, incredibly feature rich, and the fact that they give us those capabilities is amazing.
Right. I can program in any talk group ID that I want from the front panel by just going into the menu, a talk group manual dial. And even though it comes up by default private ID, if you hit the pound sign, it changes that to talk group ID. Yeah. And then you can just type in any talk group ID you want and then select that and you're on that talk group. So
yep, it's fantastic.
I actually have an old CS750 and it was even easier there. You bring up the current talk group and if you hit the back arrow, it then will let you type in any talk group you want.
My favorite, I think, of all right now is the OpenGD77. If you guys haven't spent time with that, it's you got a few bucks burning a hole in your pocket, and don't mind spending $100 on a radio that supports the OpenGD77 firmware. It's worth spending some time with. It's pretty incredible what those guys have done. They basically made it so that you really just need 2 channels in the radio, one for time slot 1 and one for time slot 2. And you can pick and choose any talk group that you want. You don't have to have these complex code plugs. It takes like 5 minutes to program the radio, and you don't need to worry about having a programming cable. You can use it to connect to anything.
Yeah, Jeff, I was going to say several of the TechNet members, they are big fans of that one. I want to bring up, do you know that Georgia has a TAC channel, going back to TAC channels? 31138?
I heard about it. Yeah, I heard about that, that it was added not too long ago.
Gotcha.
I actually I don't use DMR as much as I used to. So
lot of hobbies, a lot of interest to keep plates juggling.
APRS is what gets most of my time these days.
And
Yep.
you're big into that one. I want to check, did your question get answered? And then Stan, did you want to comment on the GD77? You're currently muted, Stan. He's still muted.
Hey, Dana, after Stan, I have a comment to make, okay?
Sure. Let's see, Stan. You can unmute, hit the space bar on your computer. Hold the
I'll just
space bar down.
mention the R-Finder radios if you want to go completely code plugless.
Oh yeah, those are pretty neat. I think that I don't know what the price structure is on them. They were having some quality issues for a while, but they're really neat in concept. I think they're kind of like, as far as like Android OS, they're pretty far behind the times at this point, but what a great concept.
There's actually a new company that has jumped on that concept and ran with it, and they are using Android 14 for their backbone. I'm trying to remember who it is.
Yeah,
There's a company, Boxtel. Is it Box?
they claim to be open source.
Hmm.
Whatever that really means. But you know, I had an old R-Finder M for a few years, and yeah, it had its issues. I recently upgraded to their B1 Plus, and after a few updates over like the last several months, it's actually gotten pretty good. They are going to reintroduce TGIF, they say, in July. They had to pull it because it was too buggy. But yeah, it's got DMR over IP, which I think is a very cool feature. Just as long as it has an internet connection one way or another, you can just do DMR that way without even having. I mean, it has its own built-in hotspot.
Yeah, the radio over IP, those are really neat. You can get them for very little money too.
I did find it. It is Comjot. COMJOT.
Yep, that's it. Yep.
Stan's with us. Stan?
Yep, Comjot.
Is it it's a Tate radio? No way.
Yeah, open source. I'm not really exactly what they mean by that. I mean, Android in theory is open source, but
I wonder if this is the same Tate that I'm thinking of.
well, and they also intimated that it was going to be so much cheaper than an R-Finder, but I think it still comes in only about $100 or so bucks cheaper. And considering the fact that you're paying $1,000 for an R-Finder.
Okay, this company Comjot, they're doing their own thing, but they are a Tate reseller. So Tate is a big commercial radio manufacturer out of New Zealand. They make phenomenal radios, but yeah, it looks like this Comjot is maybe a little open source pet project of theirs. It looks really nice. Looks like very similar hardware to R-Finder.
I think the thing that's critical is, even though this says it's currently running Android 14, are they going to, you know, when Android 15 comes out, are they going to switch over to that, or are you stuck with it on that radio forever? Because that's the problem we have with the R-Finders. Whatever version of Android was in it never got updated. You never got security patches from the Android folks for it either.
So what I think you're going to find is that whether it's R-Finder or it's these guys are not making these devices. They're basically buying a white label hardware device from somebody, and they're probably just, you know, getting like the open source version of Android and making some customizations to it, pushing it out, and then they're kind of at the mercy for whether or not the company that made the device is put a chipset in it that's going to support future versions. But R-Finder does not manufacture these devices. They buy them from somebody else.
Yeah, they come from Runbow.
So that's kind of the challenge. They don't really they don't make that. I think maybe people might be a little easier on them if they made that a little bit clearer, but
Stan,
I don't know.
Did you get your question answered?
I am going to need to run, Dana.
Okay. One final question I have, Jeff. of all the DMR networks, and I know you're talking free DMR, TGIF, Brandmeister, D-Star, YSF, etc. Can you tell me market share that you see or that you're aware of?
Oh
Because I
gosh,
know
no.
Matt's a big, he thinks Brandmeister is going to really take off this year. Every radio you buy is almost preset to go with Brandmeister. And he thought they were really gonna, he goes, they're the 800-pound gorilla in the room.
I mean, I think that they are just in terms of, I mean, they've just established a strong presence. And that's who hams think of first when they get into DMR. I mean, whether that, I don't know. We said they've got great technology. Hope you don't need support from them. Unless you like being treated like a punching bag.
I've discovered that.
Yeah, they are not the most savory people. So,
Unfortunately, but it is what it is. All
Yeah.
right. It's thank you, Jeff, for spending an hour and 10 minutes with us tonight. Really appreciate your time on DMR Tech Net TV. Hopefully your arm will get better with that operation. And we will talk to you and Matt another time. Thank you, everyone.
sounds great, guys.
Let me stop recording. Thanks for joining us. As always, Jeff, it's been a pleasure.
7-3, guys.